they never feel like they're advertising to you. They feel almost like the brand itself is content, right?
Hey everyone, in this episode we're talking with Dan Salkey from Small World. They made this super interesting paper that is called Entertain or Die. And we talk about how brands can create an unfair creative advantage. So buckle up and let's talk branding. So before we dive in, some exciting news. You might remember my episode on challenger positioning with Faisal Siddiqui from Creative Business Company. Actually, it was one of the most downloaded episodes of last season. So we decided to partner up and they're sponsoring this podcast. But more on that later.
Yeah, my name's Dan Salkey. I'm the founder and strategy partner at Small World. We're an agency that curates, builds and runs unique teams for every single brief, which we think is a bit of an unfair creative advantage for brands in the market that kind of crave cultural specialisms. And it's kind of the reason why we ended up strategically kind of writing this piece, Entertain or Die, which is all about modern brands creating an unfair creative advantage for themselves in the market. And we've done it kind of in partnership with Analog as well, which is a really fantastic design studio, and all of the kind of illustrations from the report that you'll see are kind of done by them, the entertainers as we call them. So it's been a really great process, and yeah, I'm really excited to kind of chat to you about it.
One of the biggest challenges in my own career has always been to convince business leaders that brand is one of the most important assets in their company. And even though dozens of studies have shown that getting the right strategic positioning can get you a 5x performance on your ads, sometimes convincing executives to prioritize their brand strategy can be challenging. That's why this episode is sponsored by Creative Business Company, a strategic consultancy on a mission to make brand more accountable and more effective. They take the lessons they've learned from over a decade of experience of working with brands such as Morningstar, Shell, and Formula E, and adapt them to smaller, fast-growing companies to help them get more attention, convert leads, and drive sales. So if you're trying to get budget for brand, create messaging that converts, or lower your cost of acquisition, check out creativebusinesscompany.com for ideas, evidence, and tools that will help you make an impact. Yeah, I mean, for the people watching on YouTube, you'll see the some of the amazing artwork in the paper. For the people listening, you will be able to find it in the show notes. But yeah, it looks amazing, and I was definitely triggered by the visuals, especially like the 3D characters, and I have a soft spot for mascots, so there was something there. But actually reading through the paper, it also has a really strong content, so it's not just visual sauce. And maybe walk us through a bit of set the scene for why is entertainment brands a thing, and how did that came to be?
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I mean, again, that's the beautiful marriage between Small World and Analog on this, I think, because, it's got both style and substance. Analog bring this really beautiful style, kind of out there, Willy Wonka style, I'd like to say, is one of my favorite inspirations. But then it does really have the kind of substance from our kind of, creative strategy background within Small World. So thanks for kind of noting that. I'm sort of flattered. I guess before getting to the report, it's right. It's taking a step back and saying, well, why is kind of the world set up for entertainment brands? What's changed in the world? What's happening that these brands exist, before we kind of give a definition to what exactly an entertainment brand is? And I think there are a few things that we really picked up on, and the first was purpose fatigue. There's some really good research by GfK in particular, a kind of research body who looked into the impact and the effectiveness of purpose campaigns in the last year. Cannes Lions and a lot of the kind of industry awards will have us believe that purpose is kind of, the crowning jewel of advertising. But actually the effectiveness of purpose-based campaigns has been steadily falling kind of since 2019, which was when we hit peak purpose fatigue, when Alan Jope, who's the head of Unilever, kind of stood up and said all Unilever brands are going to be purpose-led brands. And they've actually heavily backtracked on that since. And, Mark Ritzen's talked quite a lot about that, and the fact that, they now say, purpose is great for brands that have purpose at their core. And, brands like Ben and Jerry's will keep kind of doing that, but purpose isn't for everybody. And, sometimes mayonnaise is just mayonnaise. So that was one of the things that we kind of saw. There's this purpose fatigue. People are kind of on their knees with almost, purpose being battered down on them, as well as kind of doom and gloom as well. We're seeing a big return of humor as a result of that, and we're hoping that 2024 is, the rise of humor branding and humor advertising as a result.
Maybe we got the pandemic was enough in terms of anthem wars. It's enough of misery.
Precisely, yeah. Hopefully, enough of the kind of, I think, serious. What sums it up is like this seriousness,
yep.
right? People are kind of sick of seriousness. And then the next thing was kind of media inflation, or what we called here TV tyranny, but media inflation and also transformation. So TV has, or effective TV media has become increasingly expensive over the years. And the result, the reason for that is because the TV media that really makes sense for brands to buy is things like the Super Bowl, the World Cup, these big crowning moments that, the Coca-Colas, the McDonald's, the big brand, the Nikes of this world will buy. And that TV media is still amazingly effective. It's still, these moments that everybody in the world are watching. But outside of that, the rest of the TV media is really inflated for the return that lots of brands can get. So as a result of that, we're seeing lots of brands turn to new media. YouTube is the new TV for a younger generation. TikTok has become kind of social in general, or a proxy for social in general, as this kind of one channel scroll that people, go to watch from. Media is increasingly, you're seeing like blockbuster style content be released on streaming platforms and YouTube and other media. It's no longer kind of TV as like the monolithic sort of media channel. So that was something interesting that we were sort of seeing. And then it's not actually on this page, but this idea of like atomized attention spans and people's ability to avoid advertising, really. Again, like I know Netflix just introduced sort of an ad subscriber option for their platform. It hasn't had mass uptake, but even that is kind of an example of people having the option to pay not to be advertised to, and particularly the type of people who advertisers want to advertise to, people who have big wallets and money to spend. They're increasingly the ones who can really kind of afford to not have to see advertising. So increasingly brands are having to stand out if they want to stop people from only watching 3 seconds of the video on TikTok, or basically attaching an ad blocker to what they're showing. It's simply not enough to just have a massive media spend and pay your way to success, because of all of these things that we've sort of spoke about. And yeah, that's kind of how we got to entertain or die. We thought, there must be all of these problems, all of these kind of issues all sort of cause the same thing. It means that it's harder than ever for brands to stand out, especially if they're boring. So which brands are bucking the trend? And is there something we can codify between these brands? Are there some shared values about these brands that really make them stand out? And then importantly, can we test that? Can we actually measure that entertainment, gives them a leg up or gives them this unfair creative advantage? And that's what the report's all about.
Yeah, and what I found really interesting is this thing that also is something you see in marketing science in Byron Sharp's book on how brands grow, is that small brands actually get punished like multiple times for being small. You have the effects of not being able to pay as much to reach as many people, and then also having less people buying less from you, and it's like it's very hard to push through that. And then you have this whole context of media being hard to buy and not being able to reach that share of voice. And in that context specifically, I think it's very interesting, and a lot of smaller brands are really looking for ways to break through this barrier without just paying for TV ads, which is basically impossible for most.
Totally, and that's an important point to make. None of this goes against traditional brand building science. None of this is to say Byron Sharp is wrong, or the stuff that Ritson teaches is wrong. And we're not saying that small brands can outcompete big brands no matter what. This isn't even a report that's about big versus small. Actually, when we go into some of the findings, one of the biggest brands in the report using entertainment tactics. Duolingo, who we'll touch on later. This isn't about going against traditional brand building science. Of course, paid media is going to make an important part of your share of voice, but this is for those brands who have no hope of competing on those traditional media channels with traditional media budgets. This is a way of supplementing or getting an unfair creative advantage through creativity and brand.
All right. So, without further ado, what is an entertainer brand then?
Yeah, so an entertainer brand or an entertainment brand, whichever you'd like to call it, is effectively a brand that is kind of bucking the trend, as we said before. They're kind of they've embedded themselves in culture, and I know that's kind of something that gets thrown around and banded about quite a lot, but they do genuinely do that. They feel less of they never feel like they're advertising to you. They feel almost like the brand itself is content, right? And again, that seems quite abstract when I say it, but as soon as I mention some of the examples like Liquid Death, Crocs, Duolingo, you immediately recognize, I don't see them as a brand that advertises to me. I see them as a brand that entertains me, or a brand that, I watch their content in the same way I'd watch Mr. Beast. In fact, Mr. Beast's Feastables is a brand that we mentioned in the report as well. And, nothing that he does feels like an ad. It feels like something you're watching, and the brand happens to be a part of it. They're not particularly, again, new brands necessarily. A lot of them tend to be smaller brands or challenger brands, just by the nature, or the ones who do it best tend to be those types of brands, just because, again, they need to really heavily lean into those tactics. They don't get big brand effects, so you'll see a lot of those types of examples. But all in all, they're brands that use an entertainment factor to get kind of an unfair creative advantage and creative edge in the market.
Love that. There's 8. I don't think we have time to do all of them. So what I'd love to do is just maybe pick out like 3-4 of these archetypes that you guys have defined and just dive into those. So I'll let you pick them. You know them best. What's the first one you want to tackle?
I think we'll start with the scriptwriter, just because I know that will be your favorite, and I want to get that away, just because I think the whole reason I'm here is because there's brand mascot in the report. But the scriptwriter is genuinely, and that's why it's number 1 on the list, is genuinely kind of one of our favorites. And I think just a quick point before that on the entertainers, all of these, some people really hate archetypes and personality and stuff, and they say they're really kind of like they're not proper brand building science. And again, we're not saying that this is a mantra you have to follow, and you can only be a scriptwriter and you can only be a purpose punk. That's not at all. This is just an interesting framework for brand leaders to start to pick out tactics that they might want to use. Of course, you can use tactics from the whole kind of range of archetypes that we've laid out here. It's just an interesting way of starting to think about the different tactics that they use. The scriptwriter is kind of the first one that we talk about. And again, this is, if you could imagine a brand thinking of themselves as a TV show, that is what the scriptwriter strategy is all about. It's all about kind of building out a brand world outside of your product, outside of your brand, and selling that to consumers. Liquid Death is probably the best example of that. And, I've spoken to Andy Pearson previously, and he has this really great quote, which is all about, that in the Liquid Death creative war room, they think of Liquid Death as a kind of TV character. And, they have some of their own brand assets. They have the first murderer, who's kind of like their own mascot, who's regularly in a lot of their comments, but they literally just say, if this brand was living a storyline out in the world, what would Liquid Death's point of view be on plastic surgery? What would Liquid Death's view be on the generation gap and old women? What would Liquid Death's point of view be on sustainability? And they just apply that Liquid Death lens to loads of different things, and it's just this endless creative engine as a result. It's much like, again, Saturday Night Live or a sketch show. One of those, that's probably the best analogy to sort of look at. There's other brands that do this in different ways, like Brand Vibe. So Vacation is a good idea of that brand. They've applied the lens of, and I've spoken to Lack Hall as part of the report, who's their kind of head of marketing. And he said, as founders, we were obsessed with this kind of 80s Miami Vice sort of era, and we just wanted to apply that over a brand. and then they kind of cottoned onto the idea of sunscreen and the fact that sunscreen used to be a fun category, and then it had lost since, and rightly so, things like skin cancer became more prevalent. People understood the risks of tanning, and sunscreen came into play. It became this quite like hygienic, sterile category, and their whole idea was, well, why don't we bring that Miami Vice style back to this product and back to this category? And everything they do is kind of oozing that particular style, from, the emails they send out to the job titles they have on LinkedIn. And it really shows. And then finally, another great way of being a scriptwriter brand is to literally create a physical manifestation of that character. And, we've got big brands like Compare the Market over here who show us how to do it brilliantly. But you've also got more emerging brands like Duolingo, who are kind of the number one entertainer in this report. But they literally created, they had this green owl logo icon, which they then took to completely new heights. And as Duo is now famous on TikTok as the green owl that, pesters you to do your Duolingo streak and kind of, mock celebrities and does all sorts of things. And I think in their yearly end of year report, or in their kind of end of year filings, effectively their report, they literally called out Duolingo, the Duo Owl, and its impact on TikTok as having a considerable impact on their return on marketing investment, because it literally allowed them to build brand in a way that was so much more cost effective than if they'd done several different TV campaigns or put loads of money behind paid ads. So it does show that it genuinely. I'll try and find the exact thing I was talking about to provide a link for listeners, but it does show that it has a genuine business impact, that this type of creative thinking. So yeah, that's the scriptwriter.
Yeah, love that. And I mean, I really, I'm a fan of mascots, and we talk a lot about it. So I think the listeners kind of know the impact it can have. But I really like this other part about the vibe as well, and the vibe almost being like a sort of selling argument. I think we kind of underestimate the power of this, of like this like oozing vibe coming from a brand. It's really something that you buy into, I think, and it makes a brand very distinctive, and it makes it very easy for them to stand out. And I think a lot of marketers are afraid to have like a specific aesthetic or inspired on something, but this team really makes this brand very strong. And then obviously we've seen Duo doing so much fun stuff, and what's really interesting for me there is that, like, there was a gap a little bit when it came to mascots. They worked very well in traditional TV advertising because you tell this story on TV and there's a character, it makes sense. But then on digital social media, at first, it didn't really click for me. And now seeing like Duo on TikTok, it's kind of like, again, it matches perfectly with this new channel in a way that I hadn't seen it before, with like how are mascots coming to life on social media, which I'm now seeing a lot more, and I think because of this connect we'll hopefully see a lot more. But
I think it works really well, Duo, because again they applied that, and it's one of the things we talk about in the trends as well that I didn't put out, but this idea of people awarding authenticity today. Is just as you said there, when you have a mascot on a TV ad, usually they're kind of like cleaner than clean, and they're the really polished mascot of the brand, and they might do a few funny things or a few cute things, but they're not this unhinged, deranged personality, which Duo is, and Sunny, who we use on Top of the Morning, is when you put on social, which is invariably what people want to see on social, right? They want to see deranged, funny, unhinged, kind of crazy stuff. So I think they really won because they understood that, and they didn't try to just do like a cute, fun, sterile version of the mascot that you might see on TV on TikTok. They kind of really took it to the nth degree, for sure.
Voila. Okay, let's see what other archetype should we pick?
Let's go to the purpose punk next.
All right, let's go for the purpose punk. They all look interesting, so it's hard to pick, but purpose punk.
Yeah, the purpose punk. Yeah, so it's like we said, I think 2019 in my eyes, and many people's eyes, is when we hit peak purpose. That's when Unilever kind of announced that every brand that they had in their staple was going to become a purpose-led brand. And since then, we've really been kind of just purpose fatigued and really kind of fighting against purpose, or people have. Ultimately, yes, we do want to make the right decision when we make purchase decisions and go to shop, but realistically and increasingly in the world that we live in today, we're motivated primarily by value and kind of surviving, I guess, and getting the best value out of the products that we buy, and then probably purpose second, or saving the world second, for the average consumer. And we might say differently in consumer surveys, and so that is the case, but that is just kind of the case. So I think for purpose-led brands that are out there, it's not good enough to just have a purpose. You need to do purpose with personality, and that's kind of what the purpose punk is all about. It's about kind of punching people in the face of their purpose almost, and kind of really leaning into kind of the activist roots of a lot of the purpose-led campaigners of the 90s and the 2000s, people like Greenpeace, and more recently people like Extinction Rebellion. Whatever you kind of think about them, it is kind of borrowing some of the tactics from that side. Ocean Bottle is a great example. They're a brand that we worked with on their Christmas campaign last year, and a lot of the tactics were kind of guerrilla tactics, if you will, like projecting onto Amazon's warehouse and putting Jeff Bezos on the naughty list. Or kind of like doing the same thing in Oxford Circus, co-opting Santa Claus, who's kind of the main symbol of consumerism, and using him to send a message about kind of plastic pollution, and turning that around and really doing things that again make people laugh. Like, yes, these issues are serious, but it doesn't mean that the tone that you deliver them in has to be serious as well. Look at some of the best comedians out there today, like Ricky Gervais, or whoever you might look at. All of these comedians talk about really serious, deep, heavy issues, but they do it in a way that makes people laugh. And I think that is effectively what the purpose punks have to keep doing moving into next year. So yeah, the things that underpin this archetype are, number one, doing purpose with personality. And really what we mean by personality is kind of laughter and humor. Capitalist activist is the second one. So acting like activists. So borrowing tactics from a Greenpeace or a Extinction Rebellion. Back Market's a really good example. A couple of years ago, they did a campaign where they took over an Apple store and they airdropped their message onto every phone in the store and took it over, saying, not only are you being ripped off by Apple, you can get a cheaper phone at Back Market, but also, did you know that XYZ is in your phone, or the minerals in your phone are being mined from these places, and that's a really guerrilla kind of tactic, which lends itself to this isn't a really worthy brand who's gonna take it lying down. This is genuinely a brand who has fight in it, I suppose you could say. And then the last thing, which is I think probably actually the most interesting, is whilst they're also on one hand borrowing from the real guerrilla activists, they are also borrowing from what makes the category leaders the best. So Tony's Chocolonely is like one of the best examples of a purpose punk type of brand. And when you look at their brand, they borrow lots from the Cadburys of this world in terms of brand distinction. They've got really distinctive packaging and branding. They've got a really kind of fun tone of voice. They feel more like Willy Wonka than any other chocolate brand in the market. Those are all cues that they've borrowed from chocolate. Those aren't things that are unique to them. So in lots of cases as well, it's about understanding what kind of, we call it like dancing with the devil or deal with the devil. It's figuring out what actually works from those bigger players and copying those bits and then standing against them in others. So that's purpose punks. I think again we're going to see this ever more in the next couple of years as people lean into humor, etc. Purpose punks is great.
I created this podcast to help myself and others understand the power of brand building without all of the BS. So here's 3 no BS guides from my friends at Creative Business Company that you can download for free to drive impact. The Brand Investment Blueprint outlines the exact process they use to convince skeptical executives to invest in brand building projects and campaigns. How challengers can position for growth explains how brands can find and leverage their hidden advantage to create brand marketing that sells. And last, my favorite, How to Build a Big Brand on a Small Budget, explores how to outsmart and overtake market leaders with more cost-effective marketing. Go to creativebusinesscompany.com/staff to download your free guides today. That's creativebusinesscompany.com/STEF to download your free guides today. Back to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm here for it. I think purpose, like the way it was framed originally, I think it was very much companies taking themselves too seriously, except for maybe a few that really have the right to do so. I think for a lot of them, it was a bit of a mockery, and I think it's better than to take this route. And if you are serious about it, then still do it in an entertaining way, because people in general, even if it's like an authentic purpose and you're really serious about it, people still won't notice if you don't do it in a way that grabs their attention. So I think this is important. Let's pick one more.
Yeah, let's do one more. And I think this is admittedly one of the ones that we want to research more and look into more. It's probably the one that's is probably popping up the earliest, if that makes sense. So it's or the latest rather. It's, you know, there's more space for this area to grow. But the People's Play-Doh,
interesting,
kind of lobby friend there.
Yeah, the People's Play-Doh. Go ahead.
People's Play-Doh. Yeah. So People's Play-Doh, again, I wouldn't want to say that it's only necessarily like Web3 or metaverse brands, because it isn't. There's plenty of examples that we've found that aren't that, but it probably, these types of brands have been born out of that type of thinking, which is building around community, everybody being an owner of the brand, everybody participating in the building of that brand. So because of that, you do tend to see a lot of brands like Artifact, for instance, who have now been actually sold to Nike, and they create digital goods and digital fashion, and they've sold, you know, loads of their drops as NFTs. Everybody who buys from their brand has a say in kind of the next drop that's released. There's a, you know, possibility to evolve the goods that you buy. It's really participatory as a brand and really reinvents what a fashion brand could be. Similarly, you've got like crypto brands like Polkadot, for instance, where you know, crypto's got a bad name of late, but they're one of the brands that are kind of bucking that trend a little bit. And everybody is a participant in that brand. They have everyone who owns that Polkadot token has a say in governing how the business runs, let alone just the brand. And everything's built from the ground up. But then, you know, there are some examples that are cropping up that are not necessarily Web3 or metaverse brands, but they just lean into those principles. And because we've got channels like TikTok and YouTube and just hyper-connected social channels, they can do that. There's a really interesting, I don't even, you call it a brand, you call it a project, I guess, but there's a brand called Skinner. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they've cropped up on TikTok recently, and it got, you know, the guy who did it got millions of followers overnight. And his whole concept was, I'm building a fashion brand, or I'm building a clothing brand whose first release was this jacket that kind of covers your face from cameras. And he said, I want people on TikTok to help me build it from scratch. So everything from the logo, he did like a logo, and he said who would like logo A, who would like logo B, all the way up to the supply chain that they were going to use. And he said, look, we can use one supplier in market A, which is going to make the product cheaper for people to buy, but it won't be as premium. Or we can do it in market B, and it's going to be a more premium product, but a higher price point. And literally every single decision within the business, he kind of did this almost like those old school, you know, adventure stories where it's like choose your own story type thing. He's like, okay, do we want to do A or B, A or B, A or B? And was kind of building the brand. I think they've done their first drop. And I mean, obviously, when you have people who really feel like they're participating in the brand in that way, you know, it sells out overnight, and you really have this intense ownership. Everyone has this kind of intense ownership over the brand that they're buying into. So it's really interesting, and it's one that we want to keep track of. And I think we will see more of these types of brands in the next, or brands employing more of these types of tactics in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I love that, and reminded me of two other brands as well. Like I talked about this on LinkedIn briefly, but I really love what EA is doing with Skate. I don't know if you've seen that, like how they've launched that. It's not really it's a brand on its own, of course, Skate the game, and it's really like super community oriented and very much like building it together with them. And the way they frame the content is also a bit like very rough. Like they're showing a lot of like 3D footage that isn't cleanly rendered, but it's just like a lot of fun, and you can feel like it's almost this from the ground up, a bit punky way of building a brand. So I really like that one. And this also reminds me a bit of like Reddit, where you basically have their, well, of course, this is a very community-oriented product anyway. But even their like little mascot, you can customize it to your own liking, which is, I think, a smaller example. And probably with new techniques, as you mentioned, this will become even more immersive and interesting. So definitely something to watch out for. The only caveat with this type of brand is probably like, to keep your distinctiveness is probably a challenge when you're like so malleable and dynamic, but I guess that's just an interesting challenge rather than a problem.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's a good point. It's actually something that we talk about in the collaborative chameleon section, which I won't go into in detail, but Crocs is a really good example of a brand there, and they do tons of brand they're not quite I wouldn't call them people's Play-Doh brand, because it's more about partnership and collaboration, but the way that they built their fame over the last 5 years or so has been from partnering with fashion brands, icons, celebrities, etc., who have that kind of brand heat. And you're right, like, how do you retain what makes your brand famous and distinctive throughout that? I mean, I guess their idea of that was to keep the clog. Everything they do is centered around that clog shape, and they've made the clog. When you think of a clog, you now think of Crocs, and that was their way of kind of keeping that distinction. So it'll be interesting to see some of those people Play-Doh brands do the same.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I'd recommend people to go read the paper if they want to find out more about all 8 of them. There are some pretty interesting other ones in there, but it's a great playbook. And as you mentioned, like, I see them more of like battle cards or something that you can get inspired by. It's not that you have to make the choice. We'll probably see somebody take this and overanalyze brands and put them in boxes. But anyway, I know that's not the intent from you, so I really like it. Maybe let's look a little bit more into like the findings and the science behind it, because you also did some research in relation to that. Like, take us through a little bit of that so we just understand that as well.
Yeah, and maybe we're kind of victims of our own downfall, or kind of it's to our own detriment that we've tried to put so much into this report as possible that actually the findings and the research, when I've given it to people, it kind of gets a little bit gets a bit forgotten at the end. But the whole point of doing this was to not just put our strategic thoughts out into the world and have that be that. We wanted to actually prove that what we're talking about here and these interesting theories and principles are driving ultimately return on investment at the end goal, but in the short term allowing brands to build kind of owned and earned share of voice against like market leading competitors. So we created something that was called the Entertainment Index, which we'll kind of see in a second on other pages. But basically what it is, it's a score created here, like an entertainment score, which are those numbers that you kind of see there. And that score is a blend of owned and earned metrics across social, PR, search. It factors out paid spend. We wanted to make sure that, again, we didn't have brands, who could pay bang for their buck, sort of beating out others. We factored out paid spend. And it really shows how brands of entertainment in their core can outcompete those market leaders. And you can see it doesn't always work, and we'll talk about why it doesn't always work. There's, some brands here that kind of have a minus score in difference. And admittedly as well, what we want to do in the future is create a version that has just the top 100 brands by market cap, and we do this index ranking again based on just the very biggest brands in the world. But this ranking was selected by our strategy team of the very best, what we deem entertainment brands amongst those categories, and then we tried to think of what that market leading competitor would be. So sometimes we may have not matched it up exactly, but we tried to do that as much as possible. But again, when you download this, you can kind of pore over the ins and outs of the research. But there are a few things that kind of came out to us in the findings, which I admit probably should be after this section rather than before it, like you said there. There were kind of 3 things that really came out to us, which were interesting. First of all, it's this idea of entertainment brands coming in all shapes and sizes. Duolingo was by far the big winner in this report. I think their entertainment index score was at like 71 or something like that. And they're a brand who have 60% of the market share. They basically invented the category of, language learning apps. I think Babbel was the, second in the market, who maybe have like 20% or something of the market there. But they're by and far, market share, share of voice leader in that market, but they also have the highest entertainment score of any of the brands in this report. So it shows that any brand of any size really can be an entertainment brand, and they can leverage that unfair creative advantage. Like I said, they even mentioned it in their kind of end of year report and said how that owned and earned bump in kind of brand awareness was giving them kind of a reduced cost per acquisition for their app. They're calling it out to shareholders. So yeah, that's the first thing, that these brands come in all shapes and sizes, and we really want to prove that by doing this exercise just with big brands and showing the ones that really compete there, like a McDonald's perhaps. The second is that certain categories are entertainment first by default, and therefore they are going to be harder to win. So like we looked at Thursday, for instance, which in the UK is, this darling of LinkedIn. Everyone's always posting Thursday's adverts and stunts and talking about the interns who work there. And they really kind of epitomized and started that, LinkedIn, challenger brands posting on LinkedIn type stuff. And, I think they're a great, amazing brand, but when you look at their entertainment score, for instance, compared to somebody like a Bumble or a Tinder, they're kind of nowhere near. The difference is large, and that's because those categories by their very default are high interest, and those brands have kind of caught on to the idea that you need to be entertaining first and foremost. So they've lent into the channels that matter and the tactics that matter in a way that matter. Similarly, you see that in like fashion, for instance, like Artifacts doesn't really get near like the likes of a Nike, which makes total sense because Nike is a really loved high interest brand. So there are certain categories where it will be harder to stand out. But on the flip side, that kind of shows that for the brands who are in low interest categories like a Duolingo, there is this massive opportunity to be fun and entertain, because that it is easy to win in those types of categories when you're just a little bit entertaining. And then lastly, this idea of new media, especially social media, kind of being the democratic cheat code for entertainment brands. I think Mr. Beast is probably the best example of this. We kind of note a statistic earlier in the report that, we mentioned Saturday Night Live in the scriptwriter brands, which I think gets a couple of million viewers concurrently of people watching it. They actually do a lot of their stuff as a live stream on YouTube now as well, because they've recognized that live TV viewership is falling. Mr. Beast gets, I think, I can't remember the exact stat in there, but he gets at least 500,000 more on one of his YouTube videos of kind of people watching that YouTube video. So it's kind of night and day. Seeing the difference that particularly amongst younger audience that YouTube, TikTok, I would say like another channel I'd throw in there is like Fortnite or gaming, or just like, the actual metaverses that exist in this world, like Roblox or Fortnite, for instance, is probably another channel that a new media channel that's kind of democratic that brands should think about participating in some way. But it's brands like Epic Games, Duolingo, they've all built, Feastables as well, they've all built their kind of own large organic audiences on those channels and followed an entertainment strategy. One of the other brands we actually talked about, which is one to watch, I think, still probably a bit young to have like a really high entertainment score, but is Midday Squares. And I spoke to the founder, Jake Carls. They invested in effectively creating their own reality TV show behind the brand. That's what their marketing is. That's what he really was inspired by. He said it's like a combination of Keeping Up with the Kardashians and Shark Tank. He's like, what would a Keeping Up with the Kardashians dramatic version of running a business look like behind the scenes? And that's what all their content is. And they're trying to basically have people kind of follow the business in that way. And they've invested in that by having, multiple cameramen and this kind of round the clock following of the business and content created throughout the business that feels like a reality TV show, which is really like just fresh and interesting. And if you can imagine if a brand that was slightly bigger did that, the kind of shockwaves that that it would receive. So I'm really interested to see how that kind of works out for them in sort of the coming year.
Cool. Maybe like one, because there's a lot of interesting stuff in the paper. I think one thing that listeners who might be listening, working at a brand or having their own brand or whatever it is, like first probably people are thinking like, am I already an entertainer brand? Most likely I'd say 80 or 90% of the listeners don't have a true entertainer brand yet, because it's very hard to do so. So then the next question is basically, well, there's maybe two questions. One is, do I need to become one? But the third one is maybe more interesting for people that think, yes, this is the route for me, like what are some ways to actually start like transforming or shifting towards becoming an entertainer brand? What are some things you need to change? What are some things maybe you need in-house or whatever it is, like tips, ideas to start thinking about this whole shift?
Yeah, totally. And again, all of this, and this is probably my first point, is like none of this comes without strategy. A lot of the things we've put in this deck are obviously tactical. They're tactics that you would use rather than a whole strategy necessarily. The important thing to look at first and foremost, and lots of these brands do that, like Top of the Morning Coffee, for instance, was built around a realization of this, our client, this YouTuber, Jacksepticeye, saying, there is, my audience who are Gen Z gamers really enjoy coffee, but there isn't a coffee brand built for them which removes the snootiness or the kind of snobbiness from coffee. Therefore, I see this gap in the market. I'm going to create a product and a brand for them that it doesn't neglect strategy, positioning, knowing who your customer is, and leaning into that effectively. So none of this replaces that. That's the first point, I suppose. Do your due diligence, your strategy, and if you know that your audience might necessarily not want to be entertained in a certain way, then perhaps don't. There are, again, we talked about high interest and low interest categories. There are some examples of B2B brands like a MailChimp, for instance, where they are an entertainer brand. It tends to, of course, be more of a kind of B2C leaning strategy as well, leading into entertainment. But that aside, if you've done that and you think there is an opportunity here for me because of the channels that I need to be on, and because I am consumer facing, and because I need to generate brand awareness en masse with the populist population. Then there's probably two things that we can really highlight for people. One is this idea of mastering new media. We spoke about it before. And by new media, really and truly, I don't mean just social media as a whole. I think there's probably three to look at. One's emerging and kind of interesting, and people might disagree with me, but there's YouTube. YouTube, in my eyes, is the new TV. Mr. Beast has kind of shown that by having the largest following on YouTube. Millions of people watch his content every single day, just like they watch TV. So I'd say YouTube, in my eyes, is the new TV. So you either by partnering with other creators, or if you're doing something like a Midday Squares, where you're really investing in building out that TV channel effectively over the long term and a few years, then YouTube is that kind of platform for you. TikTok, in my eyes, is an amalgamation of the rest of social. It's that channel that it is one channel effectively. You're scrolling through it as you go, and it kind of feeds you what it thinks what you might need. It's of course the kind of platform for authenticity, and it's of course the platform for kind of crazy off the wall content effectively. And there are obviously ways to kind of game the algorithm, but in my opinion, the stuff that is sticky, that gets people to stay on that platform from brands, is stuff that is kind of totally off the wall. And then the last one actually is LinkedIn. I mean, that's kind of where we've met and where we've interacted. It's not for every brand, definitely not for every brand, but it is a big growth channel, and there are quite a lot of people, particularly from kind of, I guess, our generation, who have gone from traditional social platforms to now growing up through their careers and now spend quite a lot of time on LinkedIn. Twitter's kind of falling down, so a lot of the people who used to be on Twitter are now spending a lot of time on LinkedIn. It will be interesting to see how brands play on that channel in the future, and if it does become a bit of a, again, we talked about several challenger brands that use that as a marketing channel for themselves. If it becomes, if we see more consumer brands on there, so that's that. And then the last point is probably, and it sounds obvious, but triple down on creativity. The whole point of an entertainer strategy is that you don't have the money necessarily to put into paid media, or you feel that the money you put into paid media could be better spent on creative. So the whole point of this strategy is to put that cash into creativity. I think, and again, the two best examples probably of that, one is Mr. Beast, and the way that he's kind of invested time, effort and cash from going on 10 years now into his channel. Everyone thinks he was an overnight success. He wasn't. People just started recognizing his channel overnight, but there'd been kind of 10 years worth of the iceberg underneath of where he'd been doing challenges, making 10k off that video, then using that money in the next challenge to make the new video. He lives a pretty frugal lifestyle as far as I can read up and listen to from him. He's a really good example of just investing back into your creativity and then seeing the fruits of that in kind of brand awareness and share. And then the other example again that we used was Midday Squares. So the idea that their version of tripling down on creativity, they said, okay, we want to build this always on YouTube machine where we have, a camera team following one of the founders at all time and creating this kind of like reality TV show style setup. That obviously costs cash. It's not simple to just do that. And I don't even think, not to sell Small World short, even though we do help clients build sort of in-house teams, I don't think that's something that like an agency can necessarily do. Like you need to build that team bespoke and have a reality TV team effectively with you all the time. You need to build something that people wouldn't necessarily typically build. It's not like putting out a social media manager job spec and getting somebody to join up to run your social. It really is tripling down on that creativity in the same way Duolingo did, for instance. And I think in their instance, it was less of a cash thing, but it was tripling down on creativity in terms of giving, I can't remember the girl's name off the top of my head. I think it was Azaria, but giving her the license to go crazy and do what she feels is best with that duo character and really like borrow that brand asset effectively and really transform how that brand asset is used. That's an example of tripling down on creativity, is building a safe space within your organization for entertainment to exist, because when you are in a bigger organization, that's going to be the main battle, I think, is just people looking over and be like, what the hell are they doing with that iconic asset we've had for the last 10 years? What the hell are those people doing over there, doing that weird reality TV thing, where an iconic institution, we can't be behaving in that way. I think that's a number one way of tripling down on creativity, is like over committing to saying, no, these guys are allowed to run this experiment, this project. We're going to see how it goes for at least a year. Don't touch them. Don't interfere with.
Yeah, and I mean, just to riff on that, I think it is indeed like I'm 100% sure that agencies and there's a lot of parties that can help with this. I mean, it's an opportunity for everybody that's creative, but it really starts in-house with brands, because if you don't take this mindset of entertainment serious, even if it's like it's not serious, but you have to take it very serious, you will never be able to do it, even if you hire the most creative agency to help you. I think it really needs to come from within, and you need to have buy-in from within. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, and probably why you need some science also to back this up. So again, I think this paper helps in starting to foster that mindset internally as well.
100%. It comes from inside and outside.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Dan, for your time. This was really fun. And for the people that want to find out more about this, go check out the show notes, of course. And then maybe if you want to say where people can get in touch with you, if they have any questions or whatever, feel free to let us know.
Yeah, so, and again, we'll probably have this in the show notes, but if you want to learn more about this type of stuff, follow me on LinkedIn, Dan Salkey, Salkey, and also follow Small World, our agency. Like I said, the whole reason that we created this report is because our agency itself creates these sort of bespoke, unique, creative teams that build entertainment brands. So we wanted to put our thinking to the test and see if, the way that we build teams is the way that entertainment brands build their teams and get this unfair creative advantage. We also did it with Analog, so go and follow Analog, who's the design studio who worked on the report. And yeah, I guess like Steph said, if you want to actually read the report in its entirety, then there is a microsite as well where you can download it. And yeah, we're also offering kind of brand audits based around this as well, if anyone's interested. So all of that will be in the show notes. But thank you very much for having me on, Steph. It's been a pleasure. Loving all of the mascot content that you're sort of putting out. And yeah, it's an honor to be the first one back in 2024.
Amazing. Thanks, Dan. Take care.
Cheers, mate.
All right, that was it for this episode. As always, if you want to stay up to date on the latest episodes, check out the show notes. and find out more interesting stuff about brand strategy and brand building, visit letstalkbranding.substack.com. That's letstalkbranding.substack.com.